Huichokahe Washday. My name is Erin Genia, and I am a Sisseton-Wahpeton Dakota. I'm a multidisciplinary artist, mother, and cultural worker, and I center Dakota philosophies in my work. I currently serve as an artist in residence for the City of Boston, with my city partner, the Department of Emergency Management. Through this work, I am expressing that our society, as the settler colonial United States of America, is in a state of cultural emergency or cultural disaster. What I understand is that in order to truly address the deep-seated issues we face together, we must shift the framework we're using to understand, discuss, and address societal problems to implicate and change our cultural norms. We face state-sanctioned police violence, a pandemic that has exposed our political, economic, health system vulnerabilities, rising economic inequality, imminent climate change, environmental catastrophe, and systemic racism at every level of our society. So what does this have to do with monuments and symbols of colonial pride, like the Columbus statue, Emancipation Group, and the Founders Memorial in our city? To those of us who have been marginalized by these systems, these crises represent profound failures that are rooted in colonialism that is being celebrated and mythologized in these public works. Colonial mythology whitewashes how settlers over generations have profited from land theft, slavery, dispossession, ethnic cleansing, and genocide, and that their descendants continue to benefit from these crimes against humanity. Colonial mythology is everywhere, enshrined in our schools, our laws, and in our public places, and it is justified by self-proclaimed cultural supremacy. We can no longer deflect responsibility for these transgressions into the past, because colonial mechanisms persist in harming Indigenous people and people of color every day. These mechanisms occur openly in public space for all to see, creating a population that has been desensitized to its legacy. It's time to confront these myths. The city of Boston is on the traditional territory of the Massachusetts people. This is a reality that goes officially unacknowledged. It has been an epicenter of colonization of this continent since the first settlers arrived from Plymouth, England, nearly 400 years ago. On March 15th of this year, the mayor of Boston declared racism a public health emergency. Today, in part one of a two-part series, we will hear from local Native leaders and an artist who will speak about their work in the public realm and address how public symbols perpetuating colonial myths affect the lives of Indigenous people in the city and contribute to the public health emergency of racism. So thank you for joining us. I will now turn to our speakers. Today we will be hearing from Lily Manycolors, mixed Choctaw interdisciplinary artist and scholar, whose work about the epidemic of missing and murdered women is now installed on Boston Common. Mahtowin Munro is Lakota and is co-leader of the United American Indians of New England and lead organizer for Indigenous Peoples Day MA.org. And Jean-Luc Perit, who is from the Tunica-Biloxi tribe of Louisiana, serving as president of the board of the North American Indian Center of Boston. So beginning with Lily, please tell us briefly about yourself, where you're from, share about what you do, and if you could also please state your gender pronouns for everybody. Thank you so much. I'll pass it over to you.
Yakoke Erin. Hello, my name is Lily. I do not subscribe to gender pronouns. You may use any and all, please do so. I am a mixed Choctaw. I come from many places. I was born on the other side of the planet. You literally can't get farther away from where I was born than Boston. And I grew up all over Australia and the United States. So I don't really come from one place. My ancestors are from Mississippi, Louisiana, Western Africa, and Europe. I like to claim that I am the antithesis of colonialism as a ethnically mixed person. The work I do is really geared towards supporting people to be uncomfortable, and in that space finding connection to self and to others. I really think that decolonialism starts with discomfort. And my most recent work is a really uncomfortable situation, a really uncomfortable topic. I'm still kind of grappling with it. I'm still in a state of shock that it is living on the Boston Common. I don't know when the last time there was a lodge on the Boston Common. And as a survivor of multiple attempted kidnappings and sexual assault, it's a topic that really works me and pushes me into a healing space. Yeah, I just installed it and I'm still like, well, what just happened? It gestated for 2 years, and now it's in the world and it's having a lot of points of contact with all kinds of people, which is a very humbling experience for me. My intention for the Red Dress Lodge is to carve a decolonial space in such a violently colonial place. Boston is one of the beginning places for genocide, and specifically femicide. And I feel really grateful to the Massachusetts tribe for giving me permission to do this installation there. And really offer space of education. It's surprising how many people have no idea that this is an epidemic and that it doesn't happen on reservations in the Midwest alone. It happens here in our neighborhoods. So yeah, I'm humbled and still in that work. Thank you.
Thank you, Lily. Matowi, would you please say some words about yourself?
I've lived a lot of different places. I'm centered around Lakota values because those are the values that are most meaningful to me. But I'm not living on our lands right now. I've been living in Boston area for more than 30 years now, which is a long time. And before that, I lived in other places in the US and Canada too. Most of my life has been spent resisting, I guess I would say, and especially trying to unite struggles together and move struggles forward, and to try to get other struggles to understand that they have to listen to Indigenous voices and understand whose land that they're on. And that has been a long ongoing process. There are some changes happening now where more and more people are beginning, non-Native people are beginning to listen to us. But it's been a long time to get there and we still have a lot to do. I'm co-leader of United American Indians of New England, which is an old organization. It's been around for more than 50 years now. we're best known in the region and nationally, and as well as internationally, for National Day of Mourning. National Day of Mourning is an event in Plymouth every year on so-called US Thanksgiving Day, where we say that it is not a day for Indigenous people to give thanks. It's a day of mourning. It's a day when we remember our ancestors and come together and talk about what's happening for Indigenous people from all over who may be there, and talk about what we can do together to move things forward. And it's amazing to me that the first National Day of Mourning was back in 1970, and some of those same issues, many of those same issues that the elders were talking about then in 1970 are things that are still ongoing. Sometimes it can be very frustrating that there's been so little progress in some ways in 50 years. That's something that we all grapple with, I think. I've also been working for several years on statewide efforts to get cities and towns to stop celebrating Columbus, in particular to stop celebrating Columbus Day and instead celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day. And we've been successful in a number of places. And that is something that we're still working on in Boston, because Boston is committed to Columbus, apparently, as far as the government is concerned. And we feel very strongly that Boston needs to stop honoring Columbus and needs to celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day. Our marches that are in Boston every year for Indigenous Peoples Day start up near the Common, but we end up marching down to the North End Waterfront Park, which is called Christopher Columbus Park. And we go there to the statue, the marble lily white statue of Christopher Columbus that has been there since the 1970s. And we talk about blessing the water, and we talk about healing that area and healing the water and the land here, and how that statue needs to come down. And we work on many other things too, but that's just a few of the things I think for this conversation.
Thank you so much, Mahtowin. Jean-Luc, would you share a bit about yourself and your work?
Yes, so heni hotu lati lapu halito yakokejito. Thank you to all of the women that have shared their life experience before me. I'm very grateful to our host tribe, the Massachusetts tribe at Ponkapog, for allowing me to be here within the space on their land and to have a place to sustain myself these past few years that I've been here in Boston. I think I want to take like a cue from the Mahtowin and Lily, and just kind of like be a little bit open about my own background. So I'm enrolled Tunica Biloxi tribe of Louisiana, but my grandmother Faneuil Hall was enrolled Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians from the Stanton Pine community, just northeast of Carthage, Mississippi, and she was the first Choctaw woman to graduate from a college in Mississippi, and the first Choctaw woman to teach at a white school. My grandfather, Joseph Perry Jr., was our first tribal chairman for the Tunica Biloxi tribe. And during the time, just a couple of years before I was born, and then up until I was about 10 years old, we were going through our federal recognition process, which is an arduous process for any community to undertake. But we were also embroiled in the legal battle around what is known as the Tunica Treasure, and this was what was then called the largest cache of Indian trade goods, which to us would be our sacred and funerary objects and also human remains. This treasure was excavated from an ancestral village by a grave robber, then leased to the Harvard Peabody Museum, where it stayed away from our people for about 2 decades. And ultimately, after we gained federal recognition, we had a foothold in Louisiana Supreme Court, and we were able to bring that treasure back home, but it was in a state in which we had to do extensive conservation work. And so it was, again, a massive community undertaking, trying to stabilize the treasure, but then also build our own museum, and so that we could actually curate it in a respectful way. I say all of that because that's very much the context of part of what I do here as president of the North American Indian Center of Boston. That Tunica treasure case was one of the core cases around the legislation that we now know as the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. And this legislative session, we do have a Protect Native American Heritage Act, which would enforce on the state level that repatriation of sacred objects back to the communities of origin. But also, when we talk about how government-to-government relationships happen, not just on the federal level or on the state level, but also on the municipal level, when we do public works projects or when development happens, we have to be conscious of, whose original space we are in and where perhaps ancestral graves are. Be conscious of even, the colonial context of, what has happened to American Indians within the space that we are. So definitely graves protection, repatriation of goods. These are sort of like core values for me and my own upbringing. But then also, as president of the North American Indian Center of Boston, there's the social service component, and what can we do to actually, number one, foster entrepreneurship within our community, but then two, fostering those educational opportunities such that our community is able to go out, interact with these systems. Yes, they need radical change, but then we also need to be able to be versed in how to advocate for ourselves and advocate for those change, and then encourage civic engagement across our communities. So these are some of the things that inform the work that I do for NACOB. And looking forward to this discussion this evening.
Thank you, Jean-Luc. I just want to say it's such an honor to have all three of you here with us on this virtual panel this evening. And I would like to jump right into the main questions for discussion. Lily, I would like to ask you first to address these questions. So the first two questions are, how do you see monuments and memorials in the public sphere contributing to the public health emergency of racism and affecting the day-to-day lives of Indigenous people in your communities? What work are you doing to combat this or to draw attention to this?
I'm going to have you repeat that at some point later. I think visual representation is crucial for a human being to thrive. And living in these colonial cities, in my experience, I am choking, suffering, on visual representation that demands that I don't exist. When I moved to Boston, it was about 5 or 6 years of absolute torment. There's just, everything looks threatening. It looks foreign for me as a mixed Indigenous person who has a strong relationship to the land. And when I visited Providence for the first time, there's a mural called Still Here by Gaia, and it's Princess Redwing and two other Indigenous women who I feel really bad, I can't remember their names right now. The first time I saw that, I just burst into tears. I was just standing there in the street crying, and I felt this relief, and like I exhaled. So I think that Boston looks the way it does for a reason. It's designed to contribute to the consistent genocide of Indigenous people and all people of color. The next part is like, what am I doing? Is that right? Yeah. So I have this secret, not so secret takeover plan to paint every single building I can. I really want to see the stories of the local tribes on these buildings with consent, of course. I would like to see the Indigenous youth being able to reclaim these spaces. I'm working on a mural project where we're going to do exactly that. We're going to start evolving the structures, evolving the landscape to include the truth that Indigenous people are still here. They never disappeared. We never totally succumbed, and that we are very much necessary for the future that's approaching. I do think that all the colonial statues need to go. We don't need them to remind us of history. They can go in textbooks. They can go in educational tools that are accessible in a more gentle way instead of being visually violated by trauma. And that's going to be a little bit of a painful process, I think, because there are so many different types of people who live on Turtle Island and have claimed it as their own, which for me is a colonial thing to do. My teachings, we don't claim anything. We are invited in and we are accepted, and we are made family. So I think there's a great opportunity between the non-Indigenous people and the Indigenous people to learn. I'm going to use one of my favorite words. It's symbiotic, and it means collectively producing. I think there's a real opportunity for us to engage in empathy. The Italian Americans to engage in empathy, and I engage in empathy, and we can figure out how to change the landscape so that it can reflect the true history without it being traumatizing and violent. Like, I'm really over that. As like, I have a mental disability because of trauma, and I'm over it. I would like to evolve out of that. So I'm not an architect, was one thing I wanted to do in life, but I'm not great at math. So I'm a visual artist is one of the things I do. So what I can do is lend my tools of art and creating art to support the landscape, the buildings, specifically to evolve into something that's a much more accurate representation. And how incredible would it be for the non-Indigenous people to walk the streets of Boston and see these living stories and learn more about the place that also shapes them. Yeah, hopefully that answered the question.
Thank you so much. I wonder if you would be willing to show us a little bit of your work, of what's on the Boston
Sure.
right now. Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Let's get that in presentation mode here on the screen.
The Red Dress Lodge. It was quite an incredible experience to do this in the Common, and watch the interaction between this installation being built by Indigenous people and the non-Indigenous people and people of color walking by. So it's down by Little League Field, right in front of the Center Charles Street entrance. And this is myself and a young Nipmuc man named Tall Haired Red Deer. And we're moving the centerpiece. Well, it's a sculpture, which represents the wood, the plant people, the stone people, the fire people, who really support us in healing. And so this is my artistic representation of that, and we're moving it into its place. This lodge faces the west. In my teachings, the west is the place of healing, and so I positioned it to really encourage that energy of healing into this wicked, challenging place. Next slide, please. This is my sister and I. The day went perfectly, and then I realized I didn't have enough red fabric, so a friend of mine ran to Joanne Fabrics and bought me a bolt of red fabric. It all worked out. And so this is us sewing the extra fabric around. This is a lodge structure made of saplings, which was I kept stopping and just asking myself, when was the last time a lodge was here? Which feels like a very profound question, because that place has a lot of horror in the ground. Next slide, please. So this is my sister, Andre Strong Bearheart Gaines Jr., who is one of my partners for this project, and I'm extremely grateful for his guidance. He really helped me to engage in Indigenous protocol around asking permissions from the local tribes, and just really engaging in the old ways of how Indigenous guests would come into another person's territory. And then his nephew, Tall Haired Red Deer. We are working on the prayer ties that go inside, which was, it's in my experience, a really humbling thing, praying for all those that we have lost to femicide. Next slide, please. The tapestry that goes over was made by 4 local Indigenous women. Pre-COVID, I was going to have women from the local tribes come and sew and decorate the dresses with me, but pandemic, so we had to get creative, and these 4 Indigenous women ended up creating these really incredible dresses, decorating these dresses. And I stitched them together, which took me about 4 days and a lot of crying, honestly. It was really powerful, and the way they decorated them held so much meaning, and really told important stories around this topic. And so here we are laying it over the structure. Next slide, please. One of the things that was really amazing was seeing the lodge in comparison to these buildings and just like this incredible world we live in, where there's so many realities, sometimes clashing together, sometimes braiding together. yeah, it was like, it moved me a lot in many ways to constantly be seeing this contrast. Next slide, please. We had about 3 interactions with the park rangers, which with the whole climate of the world and all the protests, definitely was a little nerve-wracking at first for me. But they came in a good way, and they were as respectful as I think they understood how. And these rangers, they actually took in the information, and it was really fascinating to watch that, and then to watch my own reaction to it. And I'm, yeah, you know, it was an intersection that I'm still processing, honestly. They also asked if they could help or be of support, which when you grow up not being told that, being told the antithesis of that, and then the script gets flipped, it's a little jarring. Next slide, please. So the signs, there's 5 in total. There's 4 that surround the lodge, and they are in correspondence to the directions, and the information aligns to, for my tradition, the medicine of that direction. And it's fascinating watching people engage with this. You know, they move sunwise or anti-sunwise, and they really take it in. There's graffiti on the signs, which I feel like it's very appropriate. People are underlining sentences. And yeah, it's really amazing watching these signs really engage with the people. And they're also beautifully made. They're made by a man named Matt, who made them out of cedar. I'm really grateful for how they came out and how people are engaging with them. I think that's the last slide. I'm not sure. Yes, it is.
Lily, thank you so much for that beautiful and powerful work. How long will it be up for? How long can people view it for?
It's up until August 2nd. We didn't do much publicity for a reason. I really am so anti-colonialism, doing anything colonial, and publicity for me feels very colonial. So there is information about it. You can, there's a website, a web page that I can send you that you can post. But August 2nd is the last day. We'll be taking it down that day. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And will it live in another place at another time, do you think, or has it served its purpose at this?
If Parks Department gets their way, it'll go all over Boston. They were like, oh yeah, we can do it here and there. As of right now, I have no plan for it to go elsewhere. Although that keeps coming up. You know, a lot of it comes down to funding and permission and permitting. But I think it might, you know, this is a topic that really needs to be addressed. You know, Indigenous women are extremely crucial for the structure of Indigenous life. And it has to stop. It just flat out, it has to stop. So I think the more people can be educated in it and engage and have enough information to feel like they can do something gives me a little bit of hope. Thank you
so much. Matowi, I would like to turn it over to you right now, and just ask the question of how do you see these monuments and memorials in the public sphere contributing to this public health emergency of racism? And tell us more about all of the amazing work that you've been doing over the years to combat and draw attention to this.
First of all, I want to say it was such an honor to hear Lily talking about how she brought such beautiful medicine to Boston Common, a place that desperately needs decolonization in so many ways, and your effort to indigenize the space and also to draw attention to the epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and two-spirits, in not only here in the US, but of course in Canada and Mexico and other places too. You know, any place where there are Indigenous people, it seems that Indigenous women are being murdered. So, you know, it's something that I think we're really conscious of. It's funny to me that it's the common space, which has had fish weirs built by Indigenous people from the area before, and other things have happened there, but it always reverts to this white space. And we've been there a number of times with missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and two-spirit banners, going to gatherings of various demonstrations or rallies there, and in fact have spoken at Boston women's marches and other events there about this issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women, because so many non-Native people are completely unaware of it. And I think everything that we can do to raise consciousness about it is profoundly important. So thank you, Wopila. Thank you. I mean, your work is amazing, and it's so meaningful to hear you talk about how you did things, you know, and the spirit in which you approached everything. So, you know, I feel like Boston, Massachusetts, it's like a constant assault on Indigenous senses in a lot of ways. You know, if you can go out into the woods somewhere, or you can be by the water in a space that is not commercialized or things like that, then there's a really good feeling here. You know, it's beautiful here. And at the same time, there's this constant assault. As you go around and go from town to town, they tell you what year they were settled. And so nobody lived here until the white people got here. You know, every single town has a sign like that, right? And you know, if you go around to different spaces and look at the art or the statues or what things look like publicly, I think of how all of the things that were torn down and erased, starting with the Pilgrims and Puritans, who took down so many sacred sites and stone sites and things like that the Native people had here, because the Puritans and Pilgrims thought that it was satanic. So they pulled everything down that they could, because they wanted everybody to think the way that they did. So it goes back deep into the history. I feel like things are so covered up here, and it has an impact when we go out and we're trying to talk to non-Native people about things and trying to link our struggles together. And the reason is because so many people in this state actually think that we're extinct, that Native people are extinct, and are surprised when there are authentic Native people coming into spaces and talking about current issues, because they have this impression that we all died off. So that's something that is enhanced by the statues and the memorials and things like that. You know, if we go into the common, we look at the I think it's called the Founders Memorial, which has all those little Puritan folks on it, and then some sort of oppressed looking Native people there by them. And I think that sends a message. You know, we've stood and literally covered that space with signs many times, Jean-Luc knows too, that say land back, or with murdered and missing Indigenous women banners or things like that, just to try to reclaim that space and decolonize that space and indigenize that space. That's something that's been really important to us. I think, you know, we work on a lot of things. I guess I should say that a lot of my work now is really informed by being a mom. You know, I think when I was younger, a lot of the work that I did was, you know, I just wanted to make things better and and bring struggles together and things like that. But as I've gotten older, it's really mom informed in a lot of ways, in that I didn't want my kids and their kids and all of these beautiful youth to have to keep growing up with this insanity, you know. And so we've been working on legislation that's at the State House right now, one of which is to do a statewide ban on Native sports mascots, because there's, you know, around 40 schools in the state that still use these mascots or still have these racist team names. And that should have been eradicated a long time ago. And that sends a clear message to us that, and especially to the youth, that they don't matter. And that bothers me a lot, you know. We have legislation at the State House right now to redesign the state flag and seal. A lot of people who've even grown up here their whole lives don't even say that they haven't even noticed the state flag and seal. But I'll tell you, Native people have noticed it, because it's hard not to notice that the state flag and seal, which appears on everything, has an image of a Native man who has a white arm holding a sword over his head. I mean, it's impossible, I think, for Indigenous people not to see that. And so that legislation, as well as the Native American Heritage Bill that Jean-Luc was talking about, are currently before the Mass State Legislature. And in fact, that they need to vote on it before the end of this month for that to happen. You know, it's really more than time. It's 400 years after the Pilgrims showed up, but there were Europeans coming here genociding before the Pilgrims got here too. It's long past time for people at the State House and elsewhere in the state to start listening to Indigenous voices and paying attention to what we have to say. I feel really, you know, many of us have been working on this for a long time, but I also have to say that I feel so grateful and inspired by all the struggles for Black lives that have been happening in the streets for a long time, because, you know, their work has been so important and so enlightening to so many white people in particular. But they've actually opened up some space now, so that we have more space to be able to talk about Indigenous issues too. So, you know, I feel really grateful for that, and I feel that the alliances between Indigenous and Black people are key. In order, you know, for any struggles that we have. You know, I think it's really important to bring all the communities of color together so that we can help each other out and understand each other and make the progress together that we need. I would say that Massachusetts, Boston, it's just a lot of these statues and signs and other things that are there, that to me, it's like a cat spraying to mark his territory. So you have these settlers, the colonial settlers, who are just marking their territory, and they're marking their territory as white space. And as a result, for instance, when I think about the Columbus statue down in Boston Harbor, we know that that park was named without a public process. We know that that statue was put there without a proper public process. We've objected to it for years. We talk to people all over the state in hearings and come in and educate about Columbus and what Columbus actually did. And we try to be very frank about what he did instead of whitewashing it. And we talk about how Columbus didn't discover anything, that there were thousands of peoples and civilizations throughout the Americas who were already here who didn't invite him, that he and his men brought genocide to these shores, that he and his men would test the sharpness of their knives by cutting off people's hands and fingers, that Columbus and his men would feed infants to their big dogs that they had, and that they used these dogs to hunt down Taino and Arawak and other indigenous peoples for sport. We know that they kidnapped and enslaved indigenous women as young as 9 years old to be sold, to be taken to Europe and sexually trafficked there, in addition to being sexually trafficked in this hemisphere. You know, we can go on and on about what Columbus did. We are simply stating facts when we go into these hearings, and these are publicly available facts. Unfortunately, because we're so erased and because we're considered extinct and because there's relatively little respect for us, we're called cannibals and savages at these meetings. When we go into these meetings, we're told that we're making up the truth about Columbus, even though it's historical fact, and much of the information that we have, we're taking from Bartolomé de las Casas and others who were contemporaries of Columbus, who were right there and saw what was happening and actually were horrified by it. We're told that Columbus was okay and that he was simply a product of his time. We're told that he was a heroic and great man because he discovered America. We're told that we should consider ourselves fortunate because Columbus brought civilization to us. So this is the sort of abuse that we experience from people who want to wrap themselves around Columbus. And you know, we have a lot of responses to this, which is, first of all, not all, you know, a lot of this has been focused around certain Italian American voices rather than around indigenous voices. And I think, first of all, people need to listen to us and what we're talking about, because we come in very sincerely. And I would say that there are many Italian Americans who do not think that their identity needs to be wrapped around Columbus, and in fact are horrified that Columbus would be held up as any kind of symbol of the greatness, the true greatness of Italian civilization. So there is certainly not a monolithic view about this. But the other piece I would say is that there are some people who won't listen and just refuse to listen, refuse to learn. And we can't do, some people, you just can't change their minds, but it doesn't matter. I don't think that their feelings about loving Columbus should be privileged over the genuine damage that we feel as indigenous people by going generation after generation where Columbus is held up as being some kind of hero, and especially the damage that it does to our children, who continue to enter our school, the school systems, and be told in kindergarten and first grade that Columbus discovered America and how heroic he was. There are all of these clear symbols of white supremacy that are there in the public. And when I look at something like the Columbus statue over at the waterfront park, that is demarcating white space. It's telling me that I'm not welcome there, and that even though it's a public park, that I should not be there. And it causes harm and injury for that to continue to be there. It's privileging people who love Columbus over indigenous voices. It's like saying, well, a lot of people really love the Confederate flag, and they had ancestors who, were Confederate soldiers who died defending slavery. And it's like, that's all true, but they shouldn't be defending that. And the Confederate statues have to come down. And the Confederate flag had to come down. All of these things need to come down. We've been talking about these things for so long. It is more than past time for all of these emblems of white supremacy to be coming down. And there shouldn't be any more excuses about this. I feel sick and tired of excuses about it. Enough is enough. And I feel that we're disrespected where elected officials will not even meet with us about things. They won't even have conversations with us about these statues and memorials. And I think it's more than past due for it. for everybody to be listening to Indigenous voices. You know, you mentioned how people are desensitized to everything, because I think non-Native people are desensitized. They don't even see this stuff to a big degree that we see. But that's why we have to keep speaking more and more about what's been happening to us and the impact that it has on us.
Matowi, thank you so much for your words and for the strength that you bring to the work that you're doing. It's very inspiring. You mentioned, oh, actually, I just wanted to say one thing. We had a technical issue, so I just wanted to thank everyone for their patience who are listening live. Lily's work was not able to be viewed by people on the live stream, so Lily has agreed to post those images. So just wanted to let you know that. So thank you. And so Mahtowin, you have been working with Indigenous Peoples Day, ma.org, and I'm just wondering if you might say a little bit about how people could get involved with that work.
Absolutely, thank you. You know, if people go to the website indigenouspeoplesday.ma.org, they will get information about how they can plug in. And we're also going to be, I think, keeping efforts around the statue at that website too. You know, when the last time that the Columbus statue in Boston was beheaded, which was just last month in June, Mayor Walsh said that he was going to have conversations, and he rushed right off, dropped everything to be able to have a conversation with some people in the North End, a small group of people in the North End. We have written him repeatedly asking for a meeting and still have not had a meeting. In fact, we've been trying to get Indigenous Peoples Day celebrated in Boston since 2015 as a formal request, and during all those years, he has refused to meet with us. So I just want to say here that Mayor Walsh needs to meet with us. It's not right to get up and say you're going to have conversations and then refuse to talk with us. And it's not right to say that you're concerned about racism as a public health crisis when Indigenous people are literally dying and literally committing suicide because of the horrors that we continue to experience every day because of settler colonialism. So if people go to that website, they can find it. And the legislation that I was just talking about that's at the State House, information about that and what you can do to help, because we need immediate letters sent, people can go to maindinousagenda.org. So MA for Massachusetts, maindinousagenda.org, and they can get information there about the legislation we've been working on.
Excellent, thank you so much. I would like to turn now to Jean-Luc to hear more about the work that you are doing to confront or draw attention to monuments and memorials and things like that in the public sphere that are contributing to this, what we've been talking about, this public health emergency of racism.
Mm. And yeah, definitely thank you once again to Lily for sharing her beautiful work. Thank you to Mahtowin for bringing, re-acknowledging Black Lives Matter at the core of this discussion. I think, you know, that we're talking about, say their names, we're talking about George Floyd, talking about Breonna Taylor, talking about Brayla Stone, and all of the other community members that we have lost in recent years. You know, when it comes to monuments in public spaces, yes, definitely, like we're talking about statues. But earlier this year, on March 5th, North American Indian Center of Boston collaborated with UAIN and with the New Democracy Coalition, which is heading up the initiative to change the name of Faneuil Hall. And we did a 250th anniversary observance of the murder of Crispus Attucks. We had representatives from the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe, the Wampanoag tribe at Gehadequina, and the Massachusetts tribe at Ponkapog, among others. I think Native Nipmuc were also represented there at the observance. But definitely, you know, in front of the old State House, there is a circle that's on the ground, and it's very clearly marked the Boston Massacre site. And so for people who are conscious of that spot, of that circle, and conscious of who lost their life at that time, you know, who exactly Crispus Attucks was, and the kinship bond that he has not only to Black people in the United States, but to Indigenous peoples in the United States. On that day in March 5th, you know, we basically, you know, planted a prayer, and within the past couple of weeks, we actually returned to that spot. NACOB, UAIN, New Democracy Coalition. We planted another prayer in collaboration with the Sisters of the Calabash and an Afro-Indigenous elder from Brazil by the name of Maestra Isaura Oliveira. We returned to that spot to plant a prayer, and I emphasize that because when we're looking at public spaces, what is the reverence that is evoked from that? What, when we are walking the pathways of our ancestors, where are those spots that evoke, my goodness, you know, I need to leave an offering here, you know, flowers or tobacco or just libations. You know, I need to honor the space because this is something that is talking to me. This is something that is, there's an ancestor here that is speaking to me from, you know, to my core. And I need to stop and I need to pay reverence and I need to bring back that ancestral memory, that ancestral knowledge of what this space actually means to me. You know, I talked earlier about the graves that are out on Boston Harbor Islands, and we go back to King Philip's War, and also bringing back that conversation of say their name. When we talk about the seal and motto that Massachusetts has, you know, obviously, you know, we have very clear recent memory of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Breonna Stone. But when we look at the flag, who is actually memorialized on that flag? And the composition of that Native figure, we're talking about the head of Thomas Littleshell, an Ojibwe chief, the bones of a Massachusetts person that was excavated in an archaeological dig, and the sash of Paul Metacomet, or more commonly known by his English name, King Philip. Talking about all of the memory of that war and the violence that continues, but then also when we are bringing that symbol into our head, we don't necessarily, there's a lot of confusion because of the way that figure is composited. We don't necessarily know which ancestor we are speaking to. Of course, you know, some people say Squanto, some people say Paul Metacomet. Of course, it's the head of Thomas Littleshell, but who exactly is this person that I'm looking at when I'm looking at the flag? We can go into you know, the statue that's in front of the MFA, the Dahlin statue. Who exactly is that figure? Here by Jamaica Pond, there's the Francis Parkman Memorial, and there's a stone figure, which by the Jamaica Plain Historical Society is quote, a forest Indian, you know, but possibly could be Pontiac, you know, but we don't necessarily know. But why is it that, you know, when we go to these other memorials and monuments and statues, we know very clearly, okay, that's Abraham Lincoln with his head above a formerly enslaved person. We don't know who that person is kneeling down at the Emancipation Memorial, you know. But we can go to Christopher Columbus Park, you know, when the statue was there, and even beheaded. We know that that's that was a statue of Christopher Columbus. So things that are memorialized and are very concrete and push forward a very specific history, like those are things that are very much, those are things that are very much clear. But when we talk about the images and the ways that we are memorialized, it's something that is very obfuscated. And unless we actually have the very intimate connection with the land and knowing where graves are, or where sites are that our people lost their lives, or where our people used to gather, thinking about, even thinking about the fish weirs, or even thinking about that question in our mind of when was the last time a lodge was on what we now know as Boston Common. I'm from New Orleans, Louisiana, so I can, very clearly, there's Congo Square, which is preserved, where Africans and the United Homan Nation had ceremony in that spot. When we go back and we actually connect with the sites that we have that are sacred, the actual land that is underneath all of the stone and concrete and artificial, memorializing, we come to understand that, in a way, as Indigenous peoples, I won't even qualify that as Indigenous peoples, the land is what is our language and our memorial. Thinking about six grandfathers versus Mount Rushmore, thinking about Bears Ears, thinking about those graves that are out there on Boston Harbor Islands, or even going down to Aquina and seeing the cliffs of Masha, or even as it's known in the Wampanoag language. I'm sorry, I forgot the actual term, but it's the Creator's home, which we now know in English as Christian Town. All of these things, they're not necessarily engineered by us, but they are things that are very much tied to the old stories and our old histories that evoke a people that, are perhaps grander than we are allowing ourselves to be right now, because we have that voice in the back of our heads that is telling us, well, we're urban Indians, or we're just this, or we're immersed in poverty and all of these other societal forms of dysfunction. But going back to the land and forming that connection, things that are very simple, but having that ability to walk in the footsteps of our ancestors and having that ability to reconnect through ceremony in our own ways and offering prayers. This is something that, we need to be able to see. And so sometimes, when we talk about removal of the statues and thinking about, well, what do we replace it with? What do we recall Christopher Columbus Park if the statue is to go, and we need to rename that land something else? It's not in my interest to do that. I mean, it should go back to how the Massachusetts called that land if we're really going to be doing that level of work. So I really, in terms of, public spaces, public monuments, ways in which our peoples reconnect with the land and those ancestors that are buried beneath the surface. These are stories that we need to affirm and inform our peoples in how we actually move through this world, not in the way that societal structures tell us how to do, or tell us, in order to actually be functional in this world, that you have to, follow the way the system is prescribing for you to move. No, we need to find our own way. And we need to connect to the land in our own way, through our own stories, and share that knowledge with each other. So that's where I'm at in this conversation.
John Luke, thank you so much for sharing that and for bringing together so many different interrelated aspects of this work. I wanted to ask you, the three of you, and you can answer it in whichever order you like, but what is your vision for what we can do to collectively address these issues? Each one of you has brought up the issue of invisibility, invisibilized, how we've been as Native people invisibilized in our own homes and in our public spaces, and particularly the Massachusetts tribe of the land that we currently occupy. And so I'm just curious to hear from you. What does progress look like, and how can we get there with regard to our public spaces? Anyone want to jump in?
Well, I'll jump in. I want to say first that, you know, an underlying, I want to say that settlers don't understand where they live. They rarely understand whose land that they're on. They don't understand the history of the peoples on whose land they live. They think everything belongs to them, and that it didn't, and that this world here did not come into existence until some people arrived here from Europe. So I think it's always important for us to be speaking out and correcting that. You know, though, one of the things I really try to get across is how all of the issues are so interconnected. Everything that everybody's talking about on the streets and elsewhere right now. And, you know, I think a lot of things come back to, right now, come back to climate justice and climate collapse. Many Indigenous nations already are experiencing the effects of climate collapse, you know, literally having their lands disappear from climate change and things like that. And one of the things that I think all of us probably have been trying to say is that if you don't listen to Indigenous peoples, you don't understand where you are, you don't understand how to protect the land and the water, you don't understand what the solutions are to climate collapse and how we can heal the earth and water and start to change things. You don't understand anything if you're not listening to us, in fact. And so I think it's really important for Indigenous voices to be centered in a lot of different conversations right now, not just on statues and monuments, but on so many other things that are happening because we've been sidelined so much. You know, when land is seen as a resource, as something to be where you extract things from the land, when you look at it as something that you build upon and own and dig into and, you know, do all this damage to and those kind of things, then you have a different view of the world. And then that's how the settlers who came over saw women, Indigenous women, as being, you know, expendable. Our lives, you know, our lives were not meaningful. They're still not considered meaningful to the settlers. That's why they feel complete impunity to snatch our women literally off the street or off the road, or you know, the highway of tears, or any of the areas where we disappear, or in Duluth where Native women are kidnapped from the street and sent and go out on those ships on the Great Lakes and things like that. I mean, it's happening everywhere, but it's not considered important, and it's because I don't think you can consider women important if you don't understand the land, and if you don't have a proper relationship with the land and the water. That all of that is so interconnected for us. So I would say that not only on this but on other issues, it's really important to listen to us. I guess to bring it back to the more narrow focus of our conversation, though, I would say that, you know, a lot of things can change. All of these monuments to white supremacy need to come down. I was so glad to see that the Boston Art Commission has decided that the Emancipation Memorial is coming down. That shouldn't be there. Like, these things just shouldn't be there. And I understand that people walked past them for years and didn't really see them, but now there's no excuse not to see it anymore. You know, that change has to happen. That's critical. You know, I think that things can be renamed. I think streets can be renamed. Sometimes I hear non-Native people say that, oh, well, I can't possibly remember how to say, you know, a Native street name or that kind of thing. Of course you can. First of all, there's a lot of towns in Massachusetts that are directly from Native names, of course. But the other thing is that if you can learn to say Tchaikovsky and names like that, you know, you can obviously learn to pronounce Indigenous names of towns and streets and rivers and all kinds of areas. You know, the Charles River is not really the Charles River. It has a real name. It has a true name. So, you know, I think there could be renaming, and I think there has to be, along with that happening, there needs to be a huge amount of education, public education, and signage about things, explaining things so that non-Native people understand that things have changed, and that this is the information about it, and this is why it's changed, and this is why it was wrong before. I think all of that public education is really critical, and that's, I think, what all of us are doing in different ways, honestly.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to add to that or speak to the question?
So Carolyn Crockett has the book People Before Highways, in which details, you know, why exactly we have places like the Southwest Corridor, you know, why we have the Emerald Necklace. Like, we're Boston itself. So there's one of there's sort of an ideology conversation that's going on, like, you know, development versus like, you know, no, we need to conserve. We have our green spaces. We have spaces where community was, and it should be remembered in such a way. Mel King has the poetry book Streets, in which he memorializes the New York streets section of Boston, and so definitely, you know, when it comes to public space, there are things in recent memory that are not even there anymore, and it actually is, you know, we can talk about colonialism and the relationship to urban gentrification, but I think most critically, you know, especially when we talk about, you know, bringing in the sort of the traumatizing aspects of the story of Columbus, thinking about the dogs, thinking about what happened to the children, thinking about what happened to the women. You know, we are absolutely upfront about what is happening to our women right now. Thinking about those dogs, I mean, you know, we can look at, you know, scenes from Standing Rock and the protection against the Dakota Access Pipeline. Thinking about children, we think about like our indigenous children, indigenous to the Americas, but they are currently held in ICE custody. So there are many different ways in which to relate and to understand that the trauma that we are experiencing right now, it's not something that is just inherited. It's not something, yes, it is something that is in our blood. It is something that is encoded in our genes, this memory, but it is something that is constantly getting played out day after day against our communities. So, you know, definitely recognizing the violence, number one. Number two, how do we move to the solutions? You know, NACOB is actually a signatory on the Black Massachusetts Coalition Blueprint for the New World, headed up by the Black Economic Council of Massachusetts, in which there are, again, I think I mentioned this earlier, but there are targets for public and private sectors. We talk about perhaps like defunding the police, or, you know, God forbid, you know, police abolition. But then beyond that, what does it mean to actually intentionally reinvest in our communities? And central to that process is a participatory process. So, you know, this is not something that an academic, you know, the state historic preservation officer, or somebody from Mass Historical Commission, or even Boston Landmarks Commission. This is not something that we can go and read in a book. Like, we actually need to have that community process to understand where, you know, what are the stories that the community actually wants to preserve and affirm and uplift, because that is going to actually inform the way our children move through our schools, and our children then become adults who then become civically engaged, who then become public servants themselves and become leaders themselves. You know, we are constantly faced with, you know, why is our community not represented by people that look like us, or come from us, or uplift our values? And it starts with being able to have the community itself define and affirm the narrative that it needs, that it wants to be preserved. And this is not necessarily an issue of like our history versus their history. This is something that we all, you know, at some point need to come together and say, this is, you know, this is the facts. This is what the landscape is right now. And we all need the opportunity to be able to uplift ourselves. So we have to have a come together moment, and we then need to bring that to City Hall, bring that to the City Council, bring that to like all of these public agencies, and say, this is what you need to do. These statues need to come down. These streets need to be named this, because this is the actual harm. Our children are not able to graduate high school. Our children are faced with high rates of suicide. Our community is faced with high rates of police shootings. So, you know, we need to be able to stand on the knowledge of our ancestors, stand on their history, and go forward as a people.
Absolutely, yes. Thank you so much. Lily, did you want to add anything to this question of what can we do to move forward in a good way?
I want to say thank you to Jean-Luc and Mahtowin. I'm like processing. I have all these questions written down. I've got all these things written down. This feels really energizing. Thank you. I think the only thing I have to say, and I'll try and say it really simply, even though I think it's not a simple thing, the local tribes must be put in their rightful place in the cultural fabric. That is an absolute requirement for going into the future, going into tomorrow. The local tribes of the Eastern Woodlands must be put back in their rightful place within the cultural, social fabric of New England. And I think for many reasons that must happen. And one in particular that I'll speak to, because it does relate to why I put the Red Dress Lodge on the Commons, is Boston, Massachusetts is one of the birthplaces of this colonial disease on Turtle Island. And I personally feel that the work must also, it has to happen here because it began here. This is one of the beginning places. And there's no ifs, buts, questions about it. This is a must. This is a requirement. I do think that the species requires it. Our non-human relatives require it. The land requires it. The waters, like the earth requires this. So I think that's kind of like the response to what's happening.
Thank you. Thank you so much, all three of you. I really appreciate all of your words and your work, and the wisdom and thoughts that you bring to the world around you. You know, I was thinking on the issue of mythology. I also come to this work, Matowi, as a mom, and whenever history is taught in school for my three kids, they come home and they say to me, what is this thing that I've been told? This is the opposite of what you've told me. So we really have to spend a lot of time like downloading that whole experience for them and explaining what is the history and how that history has been mythologized into to celebrate colonialism. And so, you know, I think about some of the work that's happening around the country, different tribes, different partnerships between intergovernmental agencies, cities, states, you know, and other entities to try to address some of these issues. For example, what we're being taught, you know, what kids are being taught in schools. You know, they're still being taught these things. My kids are still, you know, coming home and saying these things. And so I guess I'm just curious to hear if anyone has any thoughts about how we can address that, and also any closing thoughts that you might have as we kind of sum up this panel.
I would like to say that I'm really honored to be asked to speak. I am an Indigenous guest on these lands, and I don't hold a lot of knowledge because I'm not from here. So it's a great honor to be asked to bring my work. I went to 17 different schools by the time I dropped out at 16. So my personal view is destroy the system. Just get rid of it. Get rid of it. And I went to multiple different kinds, public, private, you name it. And I have a mental disorder. I have brain injury. Trauma causes brain injuries from it. So I'm a mom, and I am terrified of the school system. What I'm doing personally, I have a small group of moms, and we are figuring out how to homeschool our children for this next school year because, you know, pandemic, but doing it from a completely decolonial perspective, which means learning in English. It's interdisciplinary, but for me, it's you learn through a braided system. Things aren't compartmentalized, and you learn mostly through the land. So personally, I think the whole system should just absolutely be destroyed. Like, just get yeah, get rid of it. And there are, I know that there's a woman, Tia Pocknick, I hope I'm saying her name right. I'm very sorry if I'm not. She started an Indigenous Montessori school on the Cape. That's amazing. I met her once, and that feels really hopeful and inspiring. So I think also Indigenous people need the space to reclaim the way they can educate their children. I think that's also extremely important, and something that Boston City needs to engage with immediately, like how to put people of color in those places to educate their children, because it is a great offense for my children and my nephews to be told flat out lies.
Yes, I think that word lies, that we're living in a society where people have been taught lies. And we can see those lies on display in our public spaces with these monuments. And I feel that if I didn't know that I had been taught lies all of my life, that I would be pretty upset about that. So I just think, what is the responsibility of our education system and our and all of the interconnected systems that perpetuate these lies, this mythology, really, and celebrating it. So I just wanted to say thank you so much to each one of you for all of the work that you're doing, and just wanted to send you strength for all of the things coming your way as well with the work. And unless anyone has any last minute thoughts to throw in, did want to mention that part 2 of this panel will be taking place in a week on the 28th, Tuesday the 28th. And so we'll be continuing this conversation, talking about the public space in Boston, and the mythology of monuments, how they contribute to racism as a public health emergency. So we'll be joined at that time by Elizabeth Solomon, who is a member of the Massachusetts tribe at Ponkapog. She's also the Director of Administration in the Department of Social and Behavioral Health Sciences at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. Pierre Belanger will be joining us with some of his colleagues from the organization Open Systems. Heather Livell of the Italian Americans for Indigenous Peoples Day will be joining us, as well as Darlene Flores of the United Federation of Taino People, to talk more about this issue from the stance of enriching the conversation to see how racism as a public health emergency has impacted their work. So at this time, I just want to again say thank you very much, Idamaye, to all 3 of you. And thank you very much to all of the viewers who have joined us during this live stream, as well as the Boston Arts and Culture Office for live streaming for us. I hope that everybody has a wonderful evening and a wonderful week, and thank you.
Popila.
Yakoki.
Tika Chera.